activities. Having said that, I first became interested in ecotourism in Ecuador after going to the country about 5 years ago with a school trip. And I visited an indigenous Quechua community, and I was a little bit disturbed as to how these people were sort of put on display for the benefits of tourists. So last term I took a geography course on the developing world, which was focused on Latin America. And I decided to focus my term paper on community-based ecotourism as a method of sustainable development. My main argument for that paper was that certain ecotourism operations could have undesirable impacts on the community, on the development of communities they operate in, such as increased gender and wealth inequity, and the depletion of biodiversity and resources. However, they may also have the ability to empower communities and protect the environment through grassroots movements of community-based ecotourism, which may represent a sustainable alternative. I'll begin by briefly defining the difference between conventional ecotourism and community-based ecotourism. I'll then describe some of the problems associated with conventional ecotourism today. Next, I will describe the role of ecotourism in conservation, using the example of 3 different ecotourism organizations in Ecuador. I'll then outline the concept of community-based ecotourism and how it could be developed in order to be considered sustainable. Next, I will describe indigenous ecotourism as a form of community-based ecotourism, using 3 examples in the Ecuadorian Amazon. I'll then distinguish for whom ecotourism is sustainable based on 3 principles of sustainable development. I'll finish by offering some concluding remarks, and then we can begin our discussion. The International Ecotourism Society has defined ecotourism as responsible travel to natural areas that conserves the environment and sustains the well-being of local people. While community-based ecotourism has been defined as ecotourism enterprises that are owned and managed by the community. However, there are many different definitions of conventional ecotourism, as there is often a lack of consensus between them. One of the problems with conventional ecotourism is that there are no broadly accepted criteria for how ecotourism should be implemented. This may lead to exclusion, similar to that of organic farming certification, in that the costs involved may be prohibitive to some people. For this reason, it may not be practical to implement a worldwide ecotourism certification program. However, criteria may act as guidelines to be followed or adapted to meet local needs. Yet, I would argue that local participation and initiation should be one of the defining criteria for all forms of ecotourism. I found 3 possible scenarios in conventional ecotourism. And the ideal scenario would promote sustainable conservation at the same time as income growth, which would require putting monetary costs on the amenity value of the environment in order to ensure profits in ecotourism and promote an incentive for conservation. The second scenario is that the creation of protected parks may increase ecotourism at disadvantage local populations. As a major critique of ecotourism is that it may increase existing economic and social relations, as outside ecotourism incomes differ from non-ecotourism practices. Another possibility is that indigenous people may lose access to resources as a result of ecotourism on their traditional lands. For example, the creation of natural parks or reserves may exclude indigenous people and restrict their traditional subsistence practices. However, ecotourism may be more ecologically preferable than other destructive processes, such as oil extraction in the Amazon. The third scenario is that ecotourism may become harmful without proper management. and this might lead to mass tourism and the decline of the ecological resources they are designed to protect. This situation would relate to numerous paradoxes of ecotourism, which surround both the preservation and the destruction of the environment. There may also be damage to geological features, such as loss to biodiversity and endemic species, as what has occurred from overlooking and neglecting islands. Another possibility is that there may be population increases and immigration in popular ecotourism areas, which may lead to increased crime and unsound development. This crime may be due to differences between wealthy tourists and impoverished local residents, as well as inequalities between locals involved in ecotourism and those that are not. While developments such as airports and roads may have positive effects on the tourists and residents, but harmful effects on the local environment. I should mention that all of these photos are taken by friends or family members who also visited Ecuador. Ecotourism has played a large role in local conservation, which has been facilitated through the creation of a number of organizations which promote ecotourism development. An example of a regional organization in Ecuador is the Galapagos Chamber of Tourism, which was founded in 1996 to promote sustainable tourism in the local area. It provides services to members in the Galapagos, such as legal advice, technical assistance, and training. It also spearheaded the creation of a number of certification programs for locals in the tourism sector. However, it has not led to an increase in community development capacity, as there is no community-based ecotourism in the Galapagos at the moment, only local individual-based ecotourism businesses. Another example is the Ecuadorian Ecotourism Association, which was founded in 1991 and is one of the first national ecotourism organizations in the world. It represents all social actors of ecotourism in Ecuador, including indigenous and local communities, private tour operators, NGOs, universities, local governments, and others. It also provides workshops for those involved in ecotourism, yet it is difficult to evaluate the impacts of this association, as benefits are limited to those within the country and it is often difficult to measure conservation programs. The closest thing to an ecotourism certification program in South America is called the Smart Voyager program, which operates through the NGOs Conservación y Desarrollo and Rainforest Alliance. It covers all areas of sustainable tourism, from large hotel chains to eco-lodges, minimizing environmental impacts of tourism operations and supporting local communities. It also educates tourism operators on how to reduce the impacts of their businesses on the environment and provides support to their communities and employees. However, it does not expand on what is considered sustainable tourism, nor does it ensure the direct participation of local communities. One of the main critiques of conventional ecotourism is that it has been problematic, as few communities capture the economic benefits of ecotourism. Therefore, a possible solution to this critique is community-based ecotourism, which requires the empowerment of community members through self-management of ecotourism operations and promotes local development by ensuring local participation, education, training, and partnerships. I found 3 objectives of conservation and development that ecotourism should be considered in order to be sustainable. The first is financial support for protection and management of natural areas, which would draw on local and national governments and NGOs. The second is economic benefits for residents living near natural areas. However, I would argue that there should not only be benefits for residents, but that they should be initiators of the project. The third is the encouragement of conservation among residents through economic benefits. as there are often greater incentives for conservation if the business of ecotourism is dependent on the protection of the local environment. An example of community-based ecotourism might be indigenous ecotourism, which has been defined as tourism which cares for the environment and involves the indigenous people in decision-making and management. However, indigenous ecotourism in the Ecuadorian Amazon may raise a new set of issues relating to land rights and legal and cultural rights, as well as their traditional knowledge in tourism. Land rights remain a central reason behind the development of indigenous ecotourism, in order to reinforce land claims and regain rights to their traditional resources. Yet, it should be noted that if it were not for the oil companies and export agriculturalists competing for their land, they would not need to engage in ecotourism development in the first place. Another possibility is that ecotourism may erode cultural structures, which may become commoditized specifically for tourists. This may lead to the trivialization of cultures, as tourists may treat these as entertainment, and may result in the loss of traditional practices, which may become replaced by more westernized practices. There may also be a problem of unequal sharing of ecotourism benefits among indigenous communities, as ecotourism has the potential to break communities apart, involving issues of fairness, jealousy, and exclusion, especially in relation to monetary costs and benefits. However, involvement of community participation in ecotourism, whether it is indigenous and or community-based, may leave out certain groups based on political affiliation, land ownership, kinship, wealth, education, age, language, or gender. For example, it is usually young men who control ecotourism ventures, while women often hold inferior positions, such as being involved as cooks or cleaners, where they have received little or no pay. One example of a successful indigenous ecotourism business is the Napo Wildlife Center, which was partially created and is now completely owned by an Anglo-Quechua indigenous group in order to provide jobs for themselves and protect their land from oil extraction development. It was financed by donations in partnership with the independent Ecuadorian NGO, Ecuador, and was also approved by the Ecuadorian Ministry of the Environment, who signed a renewable management agreement with the Quechua people for their territory. This approval demonstrated that the land granted to them is being used productively in order to generate an income. Another example of an indigenous ecotourism business is the Huarani Eco Lodge, which was established on top of one of Ecuador's most oil-rich areas. However, the Huarani have no oil or mineral rights, and own only about a third of their traditional land. This unequal ownership may be related to the type of involvement of the Huarani in ecotourism, in that they have a joint venture with a non-indigenous ecotourism company called Tropic Ecotourism, who is responsible for marketing, bringing in tourists, as well as guiding and transportation. A similar joint venture is the Kapawi Eco Lodge and Reserve, which represents the largest community-based ecotourism project in Ecuador. This project began as a partnership between the Ecuadorian tourism company and the Achuar people. However, there was a transfer of ownership to the Achuar in 2008, and is now owned, operated, and managed by them through their own tour operator. One of the main questions I was looking to answer in my term paper was, for whom is ecotourism sustainable? I based this analysis on 3 equity principles of sustainable development, which have been mainly left out of the Bretman definition. The first principle is geographical or transfrontier equity, which requires that local policies should be developed towards solving a global as well as local environmental problem. In this sense, ecotourism could be business practice, which can help to prevent further global climate change by promoting the appreciation of natural areas and the transfer of knowledge cross-culturally. However, ecotourism in the Galapagos has also led to an increase in environmentally damaging developments such as airports and roads. Ecotourism may also stimulate environmentally sensitive production activities such as bottled water processing or watershed implications. The second principle is procedural equity, which holds that regulatory and participatory systems should be devised and applied to ensure that all people are treated openly and fairly. This principle relates to the principle of participation, in that the local population should have a say in who is operating in their community and how they are impacting the environment. This principle also relates to the practice of community-based and indigenous ecotourism, as both types of operations ensure revenue sharing, community tourism concessions, and partnerships. The third principle is interspecies equity, which places the survival of other species on the same level as that of humans, and ensures the rights of these species to be free from ecological destruction during ecotourism operations. This idea relates to the beliefs behind indigenous ecotourism, which hold that nature has intrinsic rights, and humans have an obligation to nature and to each other to ensure that ecosystems are not degraded to the point of non-sustainability. For example, the Quechua prevented against resource extraction in their community, as they have a right to protect their land and the ecosystems which it supports. In conclusion, the creation of a defining criteria for ecotourism to be considered sustainable would continue to the benefits pertaining to environmental, economic, and social developments in ecotourism and communities that they operate in. These criteria could ensure community participation, the sharing of profits within the ecotourism community, and prevent gender and wealth inequity in ecotourism operations. It may also be determined that community-based ecotourism has the potential for sustainable outcomes in development by using this bottom-up grassroots approach. However, the success of community-based ecotourism is always contextual on the country and community in which it takes place. While ecotourism may not represent the ultimate sustainable innovation, it can be a model for other tourism developments as a step towards reducing environmental unsustainability and social inequality. Finally, indigenous ecotourism may represent a form of community-based ecotourism which promotes environmental sustainability and reinforces indigenous land rights. Yet, there are a number of issues that arise from it, such as the commodification of culture and loss of traditional knowledge systems. So before I move into the discussion, if anyone has any questions or thoughts relating to the presentation.